In this video, we install our front fender flares and our mud flaps. Stay tuned. Welcome back and/or to the channel. Today we are installing the front fender flares and mud flaps on the Crimson 5.7. Now I have a special video that's going to come out the same week as this video does. It gets into a topic that I feel kind of mixed about, but I think in the long run it's going to be a lot better for me. But for today, we're going to get the fender flares and mud flaps on. Now it's just a simple process of 3 different screws to hold this in place, and then we have our mud flap that attaches at the bottom. Now I'm going to set up with a different setup, get you in close so you can see kind of what we're doing, and then once I get one side done, the other side is exactly the same, so it doesn't pay to show both sides. So let me get you set up and we'll get going on this. Okay, so now that we've got our tools, which I'll cover here shortly. What we got is a 10mm socket and a Phillips screwdriver. And what we're going to want to do is to get the mud flap up into place first. Now, if you're doing this on your truck, you should probably clean and wax underneath here really good. I'll get into why I'm not doing that. But usually whenever you take your flares off, you're going to want to clean up really good underneath. Do an extra detail because you don't know the next time you're going to be taking your flares off. But for me, I need to get these flares on, so I'm not going to really worry about that right now. Try not to scratch your fender in the process. I know it's a difficult process lining these up sometimes. Sometimes they don't want to exactly go back in where they used to go. Sometimes you'll learn little tricks as you're going, like if you find one that lines up perfectly, you can put that one in first because you may have to pull the fender up into place. So this one here is giving me a little bit of complications. So what I'm going to do, okay, so what I did there is I just started one of them right now just to give me a bearing where I need to be. If you get it too tight, you can always back off your set one, because you may have to shift it around in order to get the other ones to line up. You may have to pull on the fender a little bit to get a screw in. And remember, with these, you're just going into a simple metal clip on the back side, so don't go hog wild and really crank these down because you could run into problems. Okay, so this flare is on. All that we got to do is get the mud flap on. Now there are 4 screws that hold this mud flap in place, and they're all 3 are on this side, 1 underneath. Pretty simple. The holes should all line up from where they were before, especially if you're doing this project and up your new screws, your old screws, and running them in. Now let's say you replace a fender flare. You could get by with running new screws and new hardware And some people choose to do that because it's a lot easier than trying to line up the old holes. So then you want to mark your holes of where you're putting everything. It's a much slower process, but it'll yield a much better result in the long run. Now, how they had this mud flap is they did have a zip tie on it. So I'm going to show you where that zip tie was and what I had to do to get that back into place. But I want to get all my screws started first. Like I said, 3 on the inside and 1 underneath. And you may have to turn your wheel in order to get in there to tighten those. On the rear, it's a little bit more difficult. You may have to pull the tire. So now that you've turned your wheel, you'll have a much easier time putting the screws in. Okay, it's pretty tight. The only thing that's left is there was a zip tie inside here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a zip tie. Now, not every truck will be this way. Most of them will not be. So you will need a side cutters for this. This was something that the previous owner did when he put these mud flaps in. Because these mud flaps are actually for one without the fender flares. But he decided to retrofit them so that he could have fender flare or mud flaps on even though there was fender flares. You want to make sure you click it a few times. You don't want it right at the edge where it's going to slide off or fall off. So make sure you get that little zip tie as tight as you can. And then with your side cutters, you just trim it flush so that the tire doesn't hit it and potentially rip it out. So this is pretty much how I got it. Pretty simple, basic, how to do this. All you're really after is to get the flare bolted up and then bolt up a mud flap if possible. Some fender flares do not allow you to do that because they stick out too far to where that flap won't bolt up. Now, fortunately, this one does, except for that one that they had to put the zip tie in. Because of that, you had to do a little modification. But the reason for it is so that you don't get kick up along the bottom of the vehicle, causing more rust and more scratches, more chips. So it's a nice thing to really have on the truck if possible. If not, you can get just a standard rubber flap and bolt that to the bottom right down here and just let it hang. That could get caught up in the tire though. That's why a lot of people like this style, because this style won't get caught up in that tire. But that's about all I've got for this video. Pretty basic. All we did was bolt up the fender flare that we had on before. Yes, if you look back and see other videos, I talk about how this flare got damaged. There's a reason I'm putting this back together the way it is. I'll get into that in the next video. But for this video, I'd like to say thank you for watching. So please hit that like button, smash that subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next one.